Sarah Chen stared at her computer screen, the harsh glow illuminating her face in the otherwise dark HR office. It was well past midnight, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from one particular response in the employee satisfaction survey. Anonymous response #247 stood out like a desperate cry in the darkness. I skip meals 3 times a week to afford my daughter's chemotherapy copays, but I still come to work with a smile because this job is our lifeline. Please don't identify me. Her hands trembled as she scrolled through similar responses she'd flagged over the past week. Response #183. Working 2 jobs to afford my mother's care. Response #392. Living in my car to save on rent. Response #156. Rationing insulin to make ends meet. Each confession pierced through the carefully maintained veneer of Silicon Valley success, revealing a darker truth beneath the ping-pong tables and free snacks. Sarah pulled up the company's benefits package competitive by industry standards, praised in recruitment materials. Yet these responses painted a different picture. Her cursor hovered over the Export to Excel button, but she stopped. Numbers wouldn't tell the real story. These weren't data points, they were people. Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus Rodriguez in Employee Resources. Found something? Meeting tomorrow? Sarah typed back quickly. Can't wait, this is bigger than we thought. She opened another survey response and her breath caught. This one was different, not anonymous. Maria Torres, senior engineering lead on their most crucial project, had written, I declined the promotion to team director. Not because I don't want it. I need the flexible hours of my current role to care for my mother. She has MS. The new role would mean losing the schedule that lets me be her caregiver. Sometimes I wonder if I'm sacrificing my future to protect my present. Sarah leaned back, her chair creaking in the silence. Maria Torres, the same engineer who'd revolutionized their battery management system, whose patents brought in millions. The same quiet professional who always stayed late, who never complained, who kept a photo of her mother on her desk but rarely spoke about her. The pieces started falling into place. The dark circles under Maria's eyes, the lunch breaks spent in her car, the polite declination of team dinners, all signs pointing to a struggle hidden behind professional excellence. Sarah opened a new document and began typing. Urgent, hidden crisis in our workforce. The cursor blinked expectantly. Tomorrow, she would begin gathering evidence. It was time to show the executive board the true cost of their success. The next morning, Sarah arrived early, armed with data and determination. The corporate headquarters buzzed with its usual energy developers heading to stand-up meetings, the espresso machine humming in the break room, keyboards clicking in a symphony of productivity. But now, she saw everything differently. Behind each focused face, she wondered about the hidden struggles, the silent sacrifices. Marcus was waiting in her office, his usual crisp appearance slightly rumpled. The employee resource specialist had clearly been up late too, evident from the multiple coffee cups on her desk. I cross-referenced the anonymous responses with our health insurance utilization data, he said without preamble. It's not just anecdotal, Sarah. The patterns are there. He spread several charts across her desk. Look at this. A 40% drop in preventive care visits over the last 2 years. Prescription fulfillment delays averaging 2 weeks each month, typically around rent due dates. A spike in short-term disability claims related to stress and exhaustion. Sarah studied the graphs, her heart sinking. And these are people making 6-figure salaries. Silicon Valley 6 figures, Marcus corrected. Factor in housing costs, family care, student loans. It's not what it seems on paper, but there's more. He pulled out another document. I started looking into our attrition data. 3 senior engineers left last quarter. Exit interviews cited personal reasons. I did some digging. All 3 had family medical situations. Sarah thought of Maria Torres. How many others like her were silently choosing between career growth and family duties. The company prided itself on its innovation, its forward-thinking culture. Yet, they'd missed something fundamental about their own people. Their discussion was interrupted by a knock. Maria Torres stood in the doorway, looking hesitant. "I'm sorry, I saw the light on. I wanted to talk about my survey response." Sarah and Marcus exchanged glances. "Please, come in," Sarah said, quickly clearing the papers. Maria sat down, her usual professional composure cracking slightly. "I shouldn't have submitted that under my name. I was tired. It was late." She paused, collecting herself. "But I can't stop thinking about the others, the newer engineers on my team, the ones with families, with parents to support. If I'm struggling with a senior engineer's salary—" "You're not alone," Sarah assured her. "We're seeing a pattern." Maria's eyes fell on one of the remaining graphs. "Is that healthcare utilization data?" Marcus nodded. "You're an engineer. You understand patterns. What do you see?" Maria studied the chart, her analytical mind engaging despite her personal stake. Cyclical drops in preventive care? Correlating with major project deadlines? She traced the line with her finger. "We're all doing it. Postponing checkups, delaying care. It's like technical debt, but with our health." The phrase hit Sarah like a thunderbolt. Technical debt, the cost of choosing quick solutions over sustainable ones. Their people were accumulating a different kind of debt, mortgaging their health and well-being to keep the innovation engine running. "Would you be willing to help us?" Sarah asked carefully. "We need to present this to the board. Numbers matter, but they need to hear the human story. Your story." Maria was quiet for a long moment, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My mother. She raised me alone, working 3 jobs to put me through engineering school. She never complained, never showed how hard it was. I learned that from her, to carry the weight silently." She looked up, a new determination in her eyes. "Maybe it's time to speak up, not just for me but for all of us." The next 2 weeks became a careful dance of data and discretion. Sarah and Marcus worked late into the nights, building their case while maintaining their regular duties. They couldn't risk word getting out too soon. Corporate politics could kill their initiative before it had a chance. Maria proved invaluable, reviewing their findings with an engineer's precision while adding the human context they desperately needed. She began quietly reaching out to other employees, creating a safe space for them to share their stories. Each new testimony added another layer to the emerging picture of silent struggle. "Another one," Maria said one evening, gently closing her laptop. They had commandeered a small conference room away from curious eyes. "Junior developer, supporting parents back in Mexico. Father had a stroke last year. He's sending 40% of his salary home and living in a shared apartment with 5 others." Sarah added it to their growing document. "How's your mother doing?" Maria's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Had to reschedule her therapy again. The new insurance rules, the copays increased." She managed a weak smile. "She understands. She always understands." Marcus looked up from his spreadsheets. "That's exactly what we need to change. This idea that struggling in silence is somehow professional or admirable." He ran a hand through his increasingly disheveled hair. "But the board meeting? Sarah, these people think in quarters and profit margins. How do we make them see?" Sarah stood up, pacing the small room. "We need to show them it's already affecting the bottom line. Maria, remember what you said about technical debt? We're losing talent, productivity, innovation potential. Every person struggling in silence is a potential breakthrough being delayed." They worked through the evening, ordering delivery when hunger hit. Maria insisted on paying, a small gesture of defiance against her usual careful budgeting. As they ate, she shared more about her mother, a former literature professor now confined to a wheelchair but still teaching ESL classes online to maintain some income. "She named me after Marie Curie," Maria said, smiling at the memory. "Told me women in science change the world. I wonder what she'd think of me now, afraid to even ask for the support we need." A knock on the door made them all jump. It was Janet Joe, CFO, working another late night. She paused, taking in the unusual gathering. HR, employee resources, and a senior engineer surrounded by spreadsheets and takeout containers. "Sorry," she said. "Saw the light on. Everything okay?" Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Janet was known for her sharp business acumen and no-nonsense approach. She could be their biggest obstacle or their strongest ally. "Actually," Sarah said, meeting Maria's eyes and receiving a slight nod, "we could use your perspective on something." The next hour changed everything. Janet sat silently as they walked her through their findings, her expression unreadable. When they finished, she remained quiet for a long moment. "My daughter," she finally said, "has type 1 diabetes. Even with our insurance, the costs are—" She shook her head. "I'm the CFO, and sometimes I worry about affording her care. I never thought—" She picked up one of their charts. "Have you considered the correlation between these health insurance utilization patterns and our project delay metrics?" They worked for another 2 hours, Janet's financial expertise strengthening their case considerably. As she left, she turned back. "The board meeting next week. Move it up. Thursday morning, 9 a.m. I'll make sure everyone's there." After she left, the room sat in stunned silence. "Did we just get the CFO on our side?" Marcus whispered. "Better," Sarah said, already reorganizing their presentation. "We got her to see herself in the story." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Word began spreading quietly through the company. Something was coming, something big. Sarah noticed more employees lingering by her office, some leaving anonymous notes sharing their own stories. The dam of silence was beginning to crack. The night before the presentation, Sarah found Maria still at her desk, staring at a photo of her mother. "Having second thoughts?" Sarah asked gently. "No," Maria said, touching the photo. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly. Mommy taught me that real strength isn't in bearing burdens alone, it's in having the courage to speak up for change." She looked up at Sarah. "I'm ready for tomorrow." Sarah squeezed her shoulder, remembering the late-night survey response that had started it all. Tomorrow would either change everything, or— She pushed the thought away. They had truth on their side, and sometimes that had to be enough. If you are enjoying the story till now, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. It costs you nothing, but for us, especially in these early days, it means the world. Let's continue. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Sarah stood in the executive boardroom, watching the sunrise paint Silicon Valley in shades of promise and shadow. Behind her, Marcus and Maria arranged their presentation materials with deliberate precision, each movement carrying the gravity of their purpose. Board members filtered in, their usual casual tech executive style contrasting with the formality of their expressions. Janet Joe caught Sarah's eye with a subtle nod as she took her seat. CEO David Chen arrived last, his presence immediately commanding attention. "I understand we have an urgent matter to discuss," David began, his tone carefully neutral. "Janet tells me this couldn't wait for the quarterly review." Sarah stepped forward, steadying herself. "What we're about to present will fundamentally change how we view our company's success metrics." She nodded to Marcus, who dimmed the lights for their presentation. The next 30 minutes were a carefully orchestrated symphony of data and narrative. Sarah and Marcus tag-teamed through the statistics, the healthcare utilization patterns, the hidden productivity costs, the correlation between project delays and personal crises. Janet occasionally interjected with financial implications, her authority lending weight to their arguments. Then came Maria's moment. She stood, professional as ever, but her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the podium. "My name is Maria Torres. You know me as the lead engineer on the battery management system, patent holder for our core technology. What you don't know is that every morning I help my mother out of bed, administer her MS medications, and arrange her remote teaching setup before coming to work." The room sat in complete silence as Maria shared her story. The declined promotion, the careful juggling of medical bills, the constant fear of choosing between career and family. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke about her team members facing similar challenges. "We're not asking for charity," she concluded. "We're asking for the tools to maintain our excellence without sacrificing our humanity. The same innovation we bring to technology should extend to how we support our people." The silence that followed felt eternal. Then the questions began. "These proposed changes," Bradley Watson, head of operations, leaned forward. "We're looking at what? A 15% increase in benefits overhead. In this market?" "Actually," Janet interrupted, "I've run the numbers. When we factor in reduced turnover, increased productivity, and talent retention, we're looking at a net positive within 18 months. "That's speculative," Bradley countered. "We have shareholders to answer to. We have people to answer to first." David Chen's quiet voice cut through the debate. All eyes turned to the CEO, who had been silent until now. "Maria, the battery management system. The breakthrough came from your team working overtime last quarter, correct?" Maria nodded. "And during that time, you were managing your mother's care." "Yes, we had a scare. She fell during the final testing phase. I worked from her hospital room to meet the deadline." David stood, walking to the window. "My father died of pancreatic cancer when I was starting my first company," he said, still looking out at the valley. "I wasn't there. I was closing our Series A funding." He turned back to the room. "Success at the cost of our humanity isn't success at all." Bradley shifted uncomfortably. "David, I understand the emotional appeal, but what?" This came from Rebecca Martinez, head of engineering, who had been quietly taking notes. "We pride ourselves on disrupting outdated systems. Why not disrupt how Silicon Valley treats its people? Maria's team delivered our most innovative breakthrough while drowning in hidden struggles. Imagine what they could do with proper support." The debate raged for another hour. Sarah watched as board members grappled with the human cost of their success, some resistant, others increasingly convinced. Janet masterfully addressed every financial concern, while Maria's presence served as a constant reminder of the real lives at stake. Finally, David held up his hand for silence. "I'm seeing two clear paths forward," he said. "We can maintain the status quo, watching our people silently struggle while delivering our innovations. Or we can innovate how we care for the people behind those innovations." He looked at each board member in turn. "I know my choice." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief as David outlined the next steps: a task force to implement comprehensive benefits reform, immediate emergency assistance programs, and a complete overhaul of their caregiver support systems. As the board members filed out, some stopping to speak with Maria, Sarah felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Marcus, eyes suspiciously bright. "We did it," he whispered. But it was Janet who captured the moment's true weight. She approached Maria, who was gathering her materials with trembling hands. "My daughter's endocrinologist," Janet said quietly. "She's connected to a research team working on new MS treatments. Let me make some calls." Maria's professional composure finally cracked. The two women embraced, years of silent struggle finding recognition in shared tears. Sarah watched, her own vision blurring as the morning sun filled the boardroom with light. Sometimes she realized the most revolutionary innovations weren't in technology at all, but in recognizing the humanity that powered it. Victory, Sarah quickly learned, was just the first step in a much longer journey. The weeks following the board meeting brought a flood of new challenges as theory met reality in the messy work of institutional change. "We're getting pushback from middle management," Marcus reported during their daily check-in. They had commandeered a small office as their command center, walls covered with implementation timelines and feedback data. "Some managers are worried the new flexibility policies will impact deliverables." Sarah massaged her temples, fighting a growing headache, and HR is drowning in benefits enrollment forms. The instant we announced the expanded healthcare coverage, we had hundreds of employees adding family members, scheduling delayed procedures. "That's good news though, isn't it?" Maria asked, looking up from her laptop. She had officially joined their implementation task force, splitting her time between engineering leadership and policy development. "It proves how badly these changes were needed." "It is good news," Sarah agreed, "but Janet's fighting fires in finance. The initial costs are higher than projected because everyone's rushing to use the new benefits at once. Bradley's using it as ammunition." Maria's face darkened at the mention of Bradley Watson, who had emerged as their primary opposition despite the board's decision. His department heads were the source of most resistance, clinging to old metrics and raising concerns about productivity impact. The conversation was interrupted by a knock. Rebecca Martinez, head of engineering, stood in the doorway with an unexpected ally, Bradley's top project manager, Thomas Chen. "Thomas has something you need to hear," Rebecca said quietly. Thomas stepped forward, clutching a tablet. "I've been running the numbers on my team's productivity since the changes began." He paused, gathering courage. "We're seeing a 23% reduction in code errors. Delayed bug fixes are down 40%. Team velocity is actually increasing, not decreasing like Bradley predicted." Sarah exchanged glances with Marcus. "Why are you showing us this?" "Because Bradley doesn't want to see it," Thomas replied. "But I can't ignore the data. My team, my best developer, was planning to quit next month. Family issues. The new policies mean she can stay. We'd have lost months getting a replacement up to speed." Rebecca stepped in. "We're seeing similar patterns across engineering. The flexible hours meant Maria's team could accommodate a developer who works best at night. Their output has doubled." Maria nodded. "May, she has insomnia from caring for her infant. Before, she was fighting her natural rhythm to make stand-up meetings. Now she logs her updates and works when she's most productive." As Thomas shared more data, Sarah felt a familiar spark of hope. This was what they needed, concrete evidence that compassion and productivity weren't at odds. But the victory was short-lived. The next morning, an email from Bradley to all department heads leaked. "Maintaining competitive edge requires discipline. Recent policy changes threaten to transform our culture from a meritocracy to a charity. While we support work-life balance, we must prevent the pendulum from swinging too far." The email spread like wildfire. Sarah's inbox filled with concerned messages from employees worried about backlash. Maria reported tension in engineering meetings, with some team leads echoing Bradley's concerns. The crisis point came during a project review meeting. Bradley, presenting to department heads, displayed a slide showing a slight delay in a major release. "Direct result of our new, flexible policies," he announced smugly. Maria stood up. "That's not accurate." All eyes turned to her. "The delay was my call. We found a critical security vulnerability that needed addressing. It would have cost us millions in patches and lost customer trust if we'd rushed to release." "Convenient explanation," Bradley started. But Maria wasn't finished. "Under the old system, my team might have missed it. We were all too exhausted, too stressed about personal issues, to catch subtle problems. The new policies mean we're actually present, actually focused. We're not just writing code, we're writing better code." Yet the room sat in stunned silence. Bradley's face reddened, but before he could respond, Thomas Chen spoke up, sharing his productivity data. Then another manager added her team's improved metrics. The dam broke as more leaders shared similar stories. Sarah watched from the back of the room, feeling a shift in the atmosphere. This wasn't just about policies anymore. It was about the kind of company they wanted to be. Later that evening, she found Maria in the break room making tea. "That was brave, standing up to Bradley like that." Maria smiled tiredly. "My mother watched the whole thing. I had her on video chat during my physical therapy session this morning, and she said something that stuck with me. 'Mijita,' she said, 'real change isn't just about new rules. It's about changing hearts.'" Sarah leaned against the counter. "Is the physical therapy helping?" The new insurance covered an experimental treatment. She stood for the first time in months yesterday. Maria's eyes welled up. She said she wants to walk into my next presentation on her own. 3 months after the initial board meeting, Sarah stood in the company's largest conference room, now packed with employees from every department. The quarterly all-hands meeting had never seen such attendance. People were even joining virtually from home, caring for family members while staying connected to this moment. The reason for the unprecedented turnout stood at the podium. Bradley Watson himself had called this special presentation. After weeks of mounting evidence supporting the success of the new policies, rumors swirled about what he would say. Some feared a last stand against the changes. Others hoped for acceptance. David Chen opened the session, his presence adding gravity to the moment. Before we begin, I want to share something. Our latest employee satisfaction scores. He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. They're the highest in company history, but more importantly, our innovation metrics, our product quality, our customer satisfaction, all up. Bradley, I believe you have some thoughts on this? Bradley approached the podium, looking uncharacteristically humbled. I've spent my career believing that peak performance requires peak pressure, he began. I was wrong. A murmur ran through the crowd. Sarah felt Marcus grab her hand in surprise. Last week, my daughter Jessica had a dance recital, Bradley continued. Under our old policies, I would have missed it. Another sacrifice on the altar of productivity. Instead, I worked flexible hours, attended the recital, and something remarkable happened. Watching her dance, seeing her joy, I realized what we've been missing. He clicked to his first slide a graph showing project success rates before and after the policy changes. The data is undeniable. Happy, supported employees don't just work better, they innovate better. But it took seeing my own humanity reflected in our new policies to truly understand. The presentation that followed was unlike anything Sarah had expected. Bradley methodically presented case after case of improved performance, interwoven with personal stories from across the company. He had done his homework, interviewing employees, gathering data, truly listening for perhaps the first time. Then came the moment that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. Bradley stepped aside and Maria Torres walked to the podium. But she wasn't alone. Her mother, Elena Torres, stood beside her, walking slowly but steadily with a cane. The experimental treatment covered by their new insurance had worked better than anyone hoped. The room erupted in applause as Elena reached the podium, Maria supporting her with gentle hands. My daughter, Elena spoke, her voice clear and strong, always told me that technology could change the world. But today, I've seen that the real change comes from remembering the hearts behind the technology. As Elena spoke about her journey, from professor to patient to inspiration, Sarah looked around the room. She saw Thomas Chen wiping his eyes discreetly. Janet Joe held her phone where her daughter watched via video chat. Even Bradley Watson stood transfixed, his usual corporate armor completely dissolved. Maria took the microphone, her professional composure beautifully balanced with evident emotion. 3 months ago, we began a revolution, not in technology, but in humanity. Today, I'm announcing our next step, the Human Innovation Lab, a think tank dedicated to developing new ways to support our workforce. And our first chair, she smiled, Bradley Watson, has agreed to lead it. The surprise announcement sent another wave of murmurs through the crowd. Bradley stepped forward, joining Maria and Elena at the podium. Sometimes, he said, the most disruptive innovation isn't in code or circuits. It's in remembering that behind every breakthrough, every patent, every line of code, there's a human story. 1 year later, Sarah sat in her new office, now the Director of Human Innovation, overseeing the program that had grown from their revolution. The wall behind her desk displayed framed copies of their original presentation and the company's new mission statement, Innovating with Humanity. She smiled at the latest report on her desk. Their approach had spread beyond their company walls. 3 other major tech firms had adopted similar programs, and industry publications were calling it the Silicon Valley Humanity Revolution. The old paradigm of success at all costs was giving way to a new understanding of sustainable innovation. Maria had finally accepted that promotion to team director, restructuring the role to maintain her caregiving responsibilities. Her mother, Elena, had become a regular presence in the office, running virtual support groups for employees caring for family members. Her literature background brought a unique perspective to their technical world, reminding them that every spreadsheet contained a story. The Human Innovation Lab, under Bradley's leadership, had become a model for corporate transformation. Their latest initiative, a comprehensive caregiver support network, was already being studied by business schools as a case study in balancing profitability with humanity. Sarah's reflection was interrupted by Marcus poking his head in. "Ready? They're waiting." She followed him to the courtyard, where employees gathered for a celebration. Their company had just been named Most Human-Centered Workplace by a leading technology magazine. But more importantly, they were celebrating a year of small victories. Parents making soccer games, caregivers attending doctor's appointments, team members supporting each other through personal challenges while delivering their best work. As David Chen raised a toast to their transformation, Sarah caught Maria's eye across the crowd. They shared a knowing smile, remembering that late night when a single survey response sparked a revolution. Sometimes, Sarah realized, the biggest innovations come not from changing what we do, but from changing how we value those who do it. The sun set over Silicon Valley, painting the sky in shades of possibility. In offices throughout the campus, family photos sat proudly on desks, no longer hidden symbols of divided loyalty, but celebrated reminders of the humanity that drove their innovation forward. Sometimes the most revolutionary changes don't come from technology, but from remembering the hearts behind it. Your worth isn't measured in lines of code, hours worked, or sacrifices made in silence. It's measured in the courage to speak up, the strength to support others, and the wisdom to know that true innovation begins with humanity. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Together, we can create workplaces where excellence and compassion aren't competitors, but partners in progress. Remember, behind every success story is a human story waiting to be heard.